Okay, today is October 23rd, 2022, and we have and it's a gigantic honor to have Sadiki Bro Shep Ojore Olugbala, also known as Shepard P. McDaniel, on the show. Brother Shep is someone I've long admired and looked up to for his work, dedication, sacrifice, and just for the person and example that he has been and continues to be to myself and so many. Brother Shep is someone that has dedicated his entire life from his youth to present to the liberation movement. Brother Shep is an organizer, activist, advocate, educator, and veteran member of the original Black Panther Party. Brother Shep also serves as both the executive director of the Universal Zulu Nation World Department of Community Affairs and program and operations director for the Safiya Bukhari-Albert Washington Foundation, which supports the families, medical needs, community projects, and legal campaigns of U.S. government-held political prisoners, POWs, and political exiles. Brother Shep continues that committed and revolutionary work today as a community organizer, youth counselor, lecturer, workshop facilitator for the Community Survival Program, National Black Panther Alumni Association, and the Universal Zulu Nation. And if there's an action, protest in New York City, you will definitely see Brother Shep there. His dedication to community work is unparalleled. Shep also maintains a private email network with at least 2 daily emails listing many of the important upcoming events for activists and political education. And Brother Shep has always been a leader in the struggle for the freedom of political prisoners. I could go on and on about who Brother Shep is and why we admire and appreciate him so much, but let's hear directly from Brother Shep. Welcome to the show, and it's a gigantic honor to have you on the show, Brother Shep.
Thank you, Ryan, and it's a pleasure to be here and to get this information out. And I want to thank you for the opportunity. I definitely appreciate the bottom of the screen, the names that you have going across. Gives people an idea that there are many freedom fighters that are still captured by the U.S. government. And even though the United States claims that they don't have political prisoners, that these are all criminals and they're not freedom fighters. So we battle with that all the time because we know there are political prisoners. And I just wanted to add Albert Woodfox to that list of fallen comrades. I see you have Maroon there. Albert just passed away. He was one of the Angola Three. Spent 40 years of solitary confinement. Along with the rest of the Angola Three, was spent crazy, torturous hours being locked up in a room the size of your bathroom, or even smaller than that. And we also lost George Edwards. He was another former political prisoner out of our New Haven chapter. And then he rests in power. So,
well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I need to add both of them to the ticker, or however it's called. But we did have a show on Albert Woodfox with King on the show, a memorial show a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
But thank you for highlighting that. We need to add him to the ticker.
Yeah, definitely. Any past shows you have, send them our way so I can put them in the network.
I definitely will.
Just so folks know, it's a private network. It's not really a listserv because we do everything BCC. Eliminates the possibility of people grabbing our listserv. And we have over 8,000 people in that network. It's been collected over a number of years. Matter of fact, it has to be updated. I got to take some folks off that change their emails and things like that. But it's panthershepcat@AOL.com, and we'll make sure you get that to paste it up there along with the other contacts. So I'm ready, right?
Okay. Well, I guess that's the easiest question. Where were you born?
Born and bred right here where I'm sitting in the Boogie Down Bronx. 1954. A lot of people know that's a so-called historic year in this country in terms of the voting rights and so forth. But that was my date of birth, November 8th, 1954. So I got a birthday coming up in a couple of weeks.
And my paternal side of my family is from the Bronx. What were your cross streets?
I was born in the South Bronx, Jackson Avenue near Boston Road.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a small part of Jackson Avenue. I was right next to Morris High School. And we moved to Queens for a short period of time, for about a year and a half, to Corona. And then we came back to the Bronx, but up here in the North Bronx in 1963. And I've been here ever since.
Okay. And where were your parents from?
My natural father is from New Orleans. My mom from Georgia, and my dad, who raised me, is from South Carolina.
Okay.
So as a young person, I got shipped down mainly to Georgia most of the time. During the summertime, they would send us down there, and I hated going down there at the time, because it was like up at 7, which was late for them, but early for me. That's the first one. Like, I'm on vacation. Why I got to get up? But they would make me get up, and they had different rules and stuff down there. The food was great, but the rules, when you're young, you don't really want to deal with that. So I couldn't wait to get back. When I started playing baseball, which I guess I'll get into when we get to some of the interview, I was able to escape doing that because we played in the summer and I was in the league, so I didn't have to go.
And what were some of the differences of the Bronx compared to Georgia, and I guess probably the 50s and 60s?
Well, what I didn't realize, being a young person, it was always a drive. They drive down by car. That's another reason I hated going down there, because it was like a long, long, long trip. And I get car sick, but for me, the only thing that would remedy it was a hamburger, which tells you that, car sickness is probably just in your mind anyway. But normally they wouldn't stop, and I didn't know why at the time. They had plenty of food in the car, fried chicken, potato salad, and all kinds of stuff to eat. But I didn't want that. I wanted stuff from the store, from the takeouts,
Mm-hmm.
But of course, later on, I realized that during that time, you couldn't go anywhere to eat due to segregation and that type of thing. And I guess, being born in '54, that was like right after Emmett Till. So my mom had real concerns over that. Even at one time I got on, she did stop to get me a hamburger. We took the bus down and told me to stay in my seat, don't get up. And me, being the revolutionary that I was even back then, I got up and got in the bus driver's seat. So she came out. She said her heart was in her throat. I'm sitting in the front of the bus driver's seat, acting like I'm driving, below the Mason-Dixon line. So, it was a big difference. The tracks were there. You cross the tracks into the main town. And, I recall buying some color forms. People probably don't know what the hell I'm talking about when I say color forms. But it was like a activity game, so to speak, where you would stick stick-ons into backgrounds, so you had Bugs Bunny and cartoons and superheroes, and things like that. And the guy cheated me out of my change. And I'm sitting there looking, I'm saying, Dad, he probably think I don't know how to count, but I know how to count. I should let him know, but then I thought about where I was at and something might come out of it, so I let it go. But that still, as you see, it still pisses me off that this guy got away with that. But I saw the signs, Negroes only, whites only. The movie theater, you couldn't sit downstairs, you had to sit in the balcony. It was just, segregation was alive and well. I'm talking about all the way, not just in '54 when I was born, because obviously I wouldn't remember that being a child, but all the way to the '60s, it was like that until folks really began to start, protesting, the segregation that took place down there. But the community was different. You walk down the road and everybody was friendly. They say, how you doing? And you don't know who they are, but everybody would speak to each other. Again, the rules I didn't like too much. If there was a thunderstorm, everybody had to be quiet and sit in a corner somewhere. One of the biggest things when we finally got a bathroom with running water, because we used to have to go to outhouses and wash, the big buckets. So it was a difference, which is why I hated it, because I didn't have all the conveniences that we had up in the South Bronx.
And how did that contribute? I mean, eventually we'll ask how you got into activism, but how did your travels, the vacations you spent, the time you spent in Georgia and the South, how did that contribute to your activism in the future?
Well, I wouldn't call it vacation. You know, my parents were the ones that was on vacation, getting rid of us. You know, they'd take us down and say, "Oh, we'll be back next week," and then the weeks would pass, and before you knew it, the summer was over. But it again, it was a reflection. You know, looking back on that whole situation when you got older to really understand what was going on, that I really understood. You know, what the Mason-Dixon line was about and what segregation and white supremacy and racism that existed in the South was really about. You know, why I couldn't stop to get a hamburger or why I couldn't go to certain bathrooms or drink water at a certain water fountain. You know, and those things are still, in my mind. I remember them very clearly. And, but again, it was a reflection type thing. When you get older, you think about things and then it's more clearer to you than when you were young.
And how old were you when you first got into activism?
Technically, you could say from the time that I was able to hang out in the street, because when you're young, especially if you're a young black male, you come in contact with the pigs, or quote unquote the police. They'll stop you, they'll mess with you, and you begin to grow a dislike for anybody in a uniform with a badge and a gun. Not even really realizing, the whole thing about, why they're there as the right arm of the oppressor and why they're there basically to protect property and rich people and so forth. Before you get political with it, you just hate them because of what they do to you on a personal basis. I can recall Halloween. That was our favorite target. We get on the rooftops, and when they would roll by, they get propelled with eggs and anything else. We could throw that at them because that was the enemy. Identified again from the time you were able to run the streets, which is elementary school. Really, you learn to distrust them and to not like them, and realize that they were a threat to your very life and well-being. So that is something that was in your mind. In terms of an actual action, that I would say that happened when I was in junior high school in ninth grade. Because we had our junior high schools were basically middle schools, but you added the first year in high school there from 7 through 9. And what happened was the high school students came by and they told all of us that were seniors that we needed to get out of there and come and join the march against the Vietnam War. And me at that time, the fear of my mom of ever walking out of school or playing hooky was always in my mind. So I never did that. But I did walk out that time. And, to my surprise, then she agreed with me, being the only son. And I tell young people during lectures that during that time, you could get drafted at the age of 17 and be shipped off to Southeast Asia and die or kill somebody that didn't do anything like to you and looked like you. And we couldn't vote until we were 21. So basically that was straight up disenfranchisement, where you couldn't have no say of we should be in the war or not be in the war or whatever, because you couldn't vote for anybody that could represent you until you were 21. But again, you could still go and kill and die at 17. So that was the beginning, I would say, that war, because it affected all of us. And I can recall the older guys in the neighborhood that we looked up to that got shipped off. When they came back, those that did come back, it created a big vacuum in the community, because before they went away, if you got in trouble, you'd go to the older guys. They would look out for you. Anybody came in the neighborhood, you didn't have to worry about somebody hurting you, because the older guys always look out. Sometimes we didn't like them. If we were playing basketball and they came and told us to get off the court, we had to get off the court. Now that they would say, "Oh, and go to the store and get me an orange soda." So you were pissed, but you couldn't do anything, and you really didn't want to, because you knew they always were going to protect you. But when they came back, many of them were addicted to heroin. And the same guys that used to look out for us, we had to put security on house party doors and stuff to make sure they didn't come in, because they would rob you. They would steal, to take care of that drug habit.
That's heavy. And um, I guess in college you also were influenced by several of your professors. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Can you tell?
What I would say is just briefly, just get back to the neighborhood. People should understand that we really had neighborhoods then. We had communities. It wasn't just the older guys that would look out for you when you're running the street, but the parents too. It was a community. You did something you weren't supposed to do, and one of the adults saw you, they could come get you. And then they would tell your parents, and you get it twice. So it wasn't the type of thing where people would just come into your neighborhood and just do what they wanted to do. Even with the street organizations, you grew up basically like my mom grew up. They called them clubs then. She was a countess as part of the counts, in the South Bronx. And when you go in, you join a street organization because you're out in the streets. But they protected the neighborhood. It wasn't until the '80s, which I guess I can get into, when the government began putting the cocaine and then the crack into the community, and the guns got shipped in, which they still shipping, man. Like they still ship the drugs in, and it became a money thing. For us, it wasn't about the money; it was about turf. Protecting what was yours. So yeah, we had quote unquote gang fights and all that, but it wasn't about shooting and killing somebody over money. And a lot of times, you become friends after you had those fights because we learn how to use our hands. Most people did take up some form of martial arts back then. I'm talking about in the late '50s and early '60s. But as we began to progress, that was one of the big, large components in the Black liberation movement was self-defense, of course, which was highly promoted by Malcolm X. And I guess we can get to the college. I went to Hunter College in 1974, which was actually 1 year after I had joined the Panther Party in '73. So I had started getting the political in the Panther Party, which attracted me. I liked the idea, as I mentioned earlier, we grew up hating the police. And then it became a lot more clearer during the rebellions that were taking place during the '60s, mainly for killing young Black men in the streets, just like they still do today. And people would take the streets. I remember Clifford Glover, back in the '60s, and how folks took to the rooftops with rifles and shot the police, and mainly in Harlem and in the South Bronx. And I can recall I wasn't involved in it because again they had strict reins on me about leaving the neighborhood to do too much, and I was heavily into sports. Even with the street organizations, you'd be a member, but if you were good, and I was very good in baseball, you weren't expected to go out on every rumble. But eventually, if there was a large one, which we did have in the Bronx against the white gangs that existed, particularly in the North Bronx, everyone had to go. There's a cult movie out called The Warriors. I don't know if you've seen it, but a lot of
Yeah,
people have.
yeah,
That was actually it was based on a book, but actually it was connected to what actually happened in the Bronx, in the North Bronx in particular, where you had some white gangs. You had the White Ministers, the Fallen Baldies, and the largest one was the Golden Guineas. They dominated three large areas in the Bronx. And we even had that where I moved. When I first moved in where I moved in now, there was some housing right across the street from my house. And there was three Black families there. And we're talking about 5 blocks of buildings. And so if we went to play basketball, they had a basketball court in the building, like in the courtyards. And as long as they was winning, everything was cool. But if we won the game, they would chain up the rims so we couldn't play anymore. So it was that type of environment until they started leaving the Bronx. But those areas I talked about, if you went into that area, you could get run over, or you could get caught and beat up, or worse. And they basically wouldn't come in our neighborhoods either. So segregation existed and still does in New York City. A lot of people don't understand and know that. certain neighborhoods are strictly those people that are of that ethnic group or that race. But we were basically, what happened was they built a new junior high school right in the middle of the Golden Guineas territory. We had some Albanian gangs there too. And they bus kids from our neighborhood to that junior high school. So naturally, they were targets when they got out of school or before they got into school. So on a regular basis, we had to go up there and defend them and fight and do all those other kind of things there. But one day, they came into our neighborhood. Two cars pulled up, one in front of a couple that was walking and one behind. They got out. They broke the arms of the brother that was walking with his girl, and they broke a bottle and cut her face up. They did that to another couple who was actually a warlord in one of the street organizations in the black neighborhood. So that touched off a war. We formed what was called the Uptown Organization. So all the projects in the North Bronx were like outposts, and anyone that came into that area that wasn't supposed to be there, if they were white, they were looked at as a threat. And so all the projects were together in the North Bronx like that. Eden Wall, Gun Hill, Boston Secor, Mark Terrace, Co-op City, Gun Hill. It was like a whole area that was sealed off. One day we got a call to be at a certain location, so like we got there, and what happened was all the gangs in the South Bronx came uptown. So we're talking about anywhere between, the group that I was with, there was about maybe 3,000 of us. And I know there were two other groups that were there, and we were not the largest, but we went to Throgs Neck. And there was one gang in the South Bronx called the Golden Javelins, and there was a rumor that they had a 50 caliber machine gun in their building. And they weren't that large, but nobody really messed with them because somebody knew that it might have been real. They did have one. And in a panel truck, they opened it up, and just the whole crew, we went through their whole neighborhood. All their stores were shot up, all the cars were destroyed, and the police never came out because this was going on simultaneously in 3 different areas in the Bronx. Little Italy in the Bronx and Pelham in the Bronx. So it was Throgs Neck, Pelham, and Little Italy. That next day, they had just created that word eyewitness news. It just came out there. And all the white gangs got on eyewitness news and they said, we're burning our colors, we're not doing anything anymore, and we're finished with this. So obviously those areas where their parents were police officers or they were part of organized crime. And they told them, like, we can't have this happening in our neighborhood, with them coming in and shooting it up and doing all of that. So that's just a little note of history. And I had talked to one of my comrades, an older brother, Deruba Ben Wahad, another former political prisoner. And I wrote a piece on this, and then he added to it, and he said that it was the same way in the 50s. For us, Columbus High School was the dividing high school where people, would get messed up, if you went there and you were black. For him, it was Roosevelt High School on Fordham Road. So like if you watch Bronx Tale, you get a little glimpse of that, when they're going down the block and they go into the black neighborhood from the Italian neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking of Bronx Tale when you were telling the story. Mm-hmm. The piece that you wrote with Deruba, is that online?
Somewhere, but I can get that to you.
Yeah, send it. I'll put it in the description of this interview. And when you were talking about the neighborhoods, what they were like, it reminded me of what Deruba was on the show a few months ago, and he was saying the same thing about neighborhoods, how they're totally different now from back when he was growing up. So it's interesting to hear you guys both tell very similar stories.
You had a lot of consistency too. Like folks lived in the neighborhoods for long periods of time. Now it's very transit. You get people that come in, they move out. More people come in, they move out, and folks don't stay like they used to. And that has a lot to do with it too.
And so how did all this, shape your activism and how you eventually got involved with the Black Panther Party?
Okay. Let's go to Hunter. Because that took up a great portion of my early time in the Panther Party. If you were in college, you had to organize on that campus. If you were in the Panther Party, that was your responsibility. And I tell young people this again, particularly those in the city university system. When I went, I paid $23 a semester. That was it. That was the student activity fee.
Wow.
So it came back. We had free tuition and we had open admissions. So if you graduated from high school, you automatically had a seat in college, regardless of what you might have or might not have learned when you were in high school. We found out a lot of that too. One of my advantages I had going all through grade school was my mom had taught me how to read before I even started school. So when I got in, I was already like 2 and sometimes 3 and 4 levels ahead when we take those stupid reading tests, which was nothing for me. But I didn't do no work, and they said, "Well, he can read, so he must know how to do it." So I always graduated, regardless of what my grades were. Until I hit 7th grade, then it finally caught up to me. They didn't let me get away with it there. So, but basically in Hunter, I played baseball there as I had done in high school. And of course, every summer we played in, the different leagues that we had there. And we would travel in Hunter.
What was your position in baseball? Second
I played
base?
the outfield.
Outfield, okay.
Yeah, I played the outfield. I wanted to pitch, but they wouldn't let me because I couldn't do a curveball. Although I did have what we called a forkball, but they called that a junk pitch. Today that's one of the greatest pitches that they use, which they call it the split finger fastball. Where it comes straight and it just dips down. But back then it was like, nah, you got to throw a curve. You got to throw a curve. But I couldn't do that, so I got stuck in the outfield. But I tell people I was 1-0 because my coach in Hunter, he let me pitch against Manhattan Community College, and I beat them. That's the only game he let me pitch. But yeah, I played the outfield. All through my career. I did get to single A, one summer. But there was a lot of racism in baseball back then in the 70s. You had to have what's called the 5 tools. If you were black or brown and didn't have the 5 tools, they didn't really give you an opportunity to move up or to even draft you or anything. And the 5 tools, for those who don't know, is, speed, you can run fast. You can throw, with a great arm. You can hit with power. And I think did I mention is that all 5? I think that might be all 5. But in any case, you had to have those tools. So black and Latino players, basically, you had to be a superstar to move up and be recognized. I know that for a fact because I know some white players that I played with that actually made the majors. And they bat like 2-something or 1-something in the majors, and they called them utility players or defensive specialists, so they could have some white guys on the bench. And I played with a couple of them too, and I know I was a lot better. But I stopped playing baseball at my 2nd year in Hunter because they had budget cuts, and we didn't travel anymore. We used to go all the way down to Florida by bus and travel up the East Coast and play with colleges preseason, so we would be ready when it got warmer outside. When they had the budget cuts, we didn't travel anymore, and I was really into the politics at that point, so I stopped playing. I played that one summer, with the Royals and the Giants. I played with them before that here, their lower level affiliates. But hey, that was it for baseball. So. Black Student Union. When I first got to Hunter, there was no Black Student Union. And I was playing baseball, and I did start taking Black and Puerto Rican studies. We had Professor John Henry Clark, Dr. Yusef Jackman, Maremba Ani, Luis Falcone, Myrna Bain. We had a lot of different, Anderson Taylor. We had a lot of noted scholars there, and some would come in and visit. And that was my major. When I went to Hunter originally, and some folks laugh at me about it, I went there because of the academics of it. That was one. Two, they had a baseball team, and it was a good team. And I knew about them traveling. And the third reason was there was an 8-to-1 ratio of women to men. So, Hunter was known as the party school also, and people, guys would come from all over for the Hunter dances because they knew there would be women there. So, Black Studies classes, I might have been me and two other brothers in the class and all sisters in there. So, they had a little effect on it. But then as I began to learn about Black history and culture, then I realized that I didn't know shit. We didn't get that in high school, just like we didn't really get the academics in high school. I mentioned earlier that I had been taught how to read early, and just checking the time. I had been taught how to read early, and English I always passed. I hated history, believe it or not. And I found, later on I realized because it was all fake and it was all lies. I couldn't stand history, but I was good in English. My first paper in expository writing, I got a C- on the paper. It was something like, "What did you do during the year?" or something like that. And immediately I said, "Oh, this is a racist professor." I know I got 90s and all the time in English, but he hit me up. I didn't know what a run-on sentence was. Certain grammar things, I did not have a clue. I didn't pass that year, but I did the next year when I retook it. And then I became a pretty good writer after that. But I realized that how many students that did not go to college, even though it was free, they went right into the work, the wage slave work market. They just got jobs. They couldn't go to school even though it was free. And they didn't get all this history. They didn't get all this knowledge. They didn't learn that they really did not know the academics, which is why in city government you have such problems with people that work for city governments that did not go to college. Now it's a little different, but back then, you got folks who were inadequate in their academics to be able to do that. Some people who had to take remedial classes. You might spend a year, maybe 2 years taking classes to get you up to college level, but you don't get no credit for it. So a lot of folks left because of that. It was like, look, I can't do this. I got to go to work. And so they left. So that was a way of weeding us out. Then, of course, they brought tuition in. And while we were there, we told them we were going to burn the motherfucker down if they put tuition in. And we meant it. We weren't playing. Again, Vietnam was still going on. There was still rebellions in the street. When I get to the Panther Party, that war with COINTELPRO and everything was still happening. And we were up in arms. It was the Black Liberation Movement was going on there. And they knew we weren't playing. And so they gave us TAP, Tuition Assistance Program, and it paid for the tuition. So we had nothing to fight about at that point, but we told the other folks that were coming up behind us, you'll have to stay vigilant. You got to be militant because they're going to, get rid of you some way or another, which is what ended up happening. It wasn't our structure because when I had went to look for the BSU after I stopped playing baseball, it didn't exist because every 4 years the leadership would graduate, and there was a vacuum there. And it would usually take about 2 years before people finally got together and came back with it. So being a Panther and understanding what Central Committee is and what a structure could be that doesn't have a hierarchy, because then, you had to be president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, blah, 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 to have a student club. We had a Central Committee. We had 2 representatives on each committee: political committee, cultural committee, information, education, and it had 2 representatives on each committee that made up the Central Committee. One of those reps was a junior senior, the other was a freshman sophomore. So that way when the older person graduated, the next person would be able to move up. And so we had continuity, which worked for about 6 years. We didn't have any gaps, but the mindset of the students changed. They became to a point where they were afraid to be militant. They didn't want to get kicked out of school, and they were afraid they were going to get in trouble. And that we didn't anticipate that, but that was the way things were, particularly starting in the 80s when it was all about individualism and partying and disco and drugs and all those things. That's the whole 80s was a lost decade. Panther Party. Oh, even before. All right, this is related.
Shep, can I ask? Like you mentioned that in the '80s things shifted, and a lot of it had to do with individualism. But do you think that COINTELPRO played into that? Because my understanding,
absolutely.
Can you
because
say?
they began to not only destroy the Black liberation organizations that were above ground, but the educational system. Black studies departments were either diluted or they were completely eliminated. Black bookstores were eliminated. We had Freedom Prep, Harlem Prep in Harlem. They would close those down. They just did a whole attack on our community. And again, when you put the drugs in there, that had a great effect on just the whole consciousness. There's a great film that people can watch called Bastards of the Party. It was done by brother Sloan, Clee Sloan, who was a member of the Bloods. And he shows the whole migration from the South to the West Coast, to primarily he deals with Los Angeles. Great film because it shows exactly what I'm talking about, how migration was there, how folks were attacked by white racist gangs, how they organized to defend themselves, and how they became the Black Panther Party or the Republic of New Africa on the East Coast and in the South. And then when they were destroyed, they morphed into the street gangs known as the Bloods, Crips, and Nortes, and so on and so forth. And the drugs, of course, was involved in it. So that's a good film to see about that. There's a number of other ones. I try to get you a list at some point. So we built a hospital in Mozambique when I was in Hunter. We had clothing programs into Tanzania, also known as South Africa, because the struggle in South Africa was still going on then. The whole African liberation movement in Angola, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, that whole area was still at war. And growing up, you had a lot of, not so much refugees, but you had a lot of political exiles that came here, and some of them went to Hunter. And so we got that whole experience. We went to DC every year for African Liberation Day. Incidentally, we had the largest budget on the campus because we had the largest membership. Mainly because during orientation, we would set up BSU tables and CSU tables and all of that. And when freshmen came in, they were told they had to join. So the more students you had in your club, the more money you got. So we had more money than anybody else. So we were able to make trips and do all these things. There was a play called Ipitambi, which was about African dance and culture and so forth. And it was coming on Broadway. It even had this commercial. People who don't remember, this guy used to do the 7-Up commercials. He used to go, the Uncola. He had a real deep voice. But he did the commercial. He used to go, Ipitambe, come see Africa. And then we found out that the South African government was backing that. So we shut it down. We went to Broadway in freezing cold days and shut down the whole theater. And we closed it down. We shut them out. They had to leave New York before they could even really get started because people went and got their money back before they went in. The Krugerrang they were saying buy an ounce of pure gold, support South Africa. We shut that down. We had a prison program at Greenhaven, and Professor Clark and the professors would go up there and, do programs there. And from there, we learned about this place called Hale House, and I see I only got 10 minutes left. And
you're good. Take your time. Take your time.
Okay. And that's what led me into being a child care worker when I did leave school, because I wanted to teach originally, but at Hale House, children that were addicted to heroin from back again in the 60s and 70s, this woman named Clara Hale, she
Mother Hale.
she had a brownstone and she would take them in. And so the brothers in prison told us about it. They said, well, they need help. They're not getting any funds or anything. So we went there. We volunteered there. Then eventually, students could do their field work there and get credit. Um, they could do, just basically go there and make that part of their curriculum. In addition to that, and we exposed that, and we got that done. Another big thing we did was the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. We found out that it was going to be sold to West Germany. The war was still up at that time, the Berlin War, because they said that the books were being damaged from the rain and they weren't taking care of it. And the library couldn't afford it. And we got wind that it was going to be sold and shipped out, the whole collection, to West Germany. So we found out. We organized a benefit jazz concert to get the publicity out. We had jazz musicians from all over the country that came to Hunter perform. And we got the word out, and we stopped that. And when they had the groundbreaking ceremony, we were one of the guests of honor there, for the Schomburg. So we stopped that from happening. Those are just some of the things we did in Hunter. We put in the first black student government. We found they tried to cheat us the first time around. They forced ballots and everything else. And then we found out about it, and then the next year we put it in. But we didn't usually pay them any mind anyway. But that was another organizing thing that we did there. And when Roots came out, they ran. They couldn't restrain themselves from coming to Hunter because they knew we had a great department, and we tore that to pieces because of all the inaccuracies in it. And that they were real disappointed about that. ABC was like, "Oh wow, we didn't know that." But then, of course, later on we found that Alex Haley actually plagiarized the book. But let me get to the Panther Party. I joined the party primarily, I mentioned earlier, because the conditions that existed in the Black and brown communities here. Not just the police brutality and terrorism, but the housing, the education, all those things. It made sense reading the 10-point platform that things weren't correct. The Black Panther newspaper was available, and I read that. What I did not know, when I finally wrote to Oakland and they told me who to get in touch with, I didn't know that there was a split in the party. I knew there was a Panther office on 7th Avenue and 122nd Street, but it was boarded up when I joined in 73. But they told me to go to Broadway in 96, where they had a bookstore and a record shop called Seize the Time. And so I went there and I joined. And then I found out that I was joining the UEP Newton faction as opposed to, quote unquote, the Eldridge Cleaver faction. And the Eldridge Cleaver faction had really been mostly the New York chapter, which left UE's. So that was not a fun time. Yes, we had the bookstore, which we basically used the proceeds for prison commissary programs. And of course, I was in Hunter organizing students, on the campus. And, some of the things I just mentioned, that's what we did there. And we had, besides the prison and the high school, we had the newspaper. I eventually became the East Coast distribution manager in the newspaper when we lost the bookstore. They didn't tell me that the bank was coming to take it, and they did. Pissed me off because all the records and books and everything got chained away and we never got them. But lost the bookstore. But the reason I said it was a bad time, we would put up posters through Harlem, read the Black Panther news, and then at night, and then come back the next day, and they'd be covered up with support the Black Liberation Army. Because those are the two factions. One still dealt with armed struggle and believed in that, and the other said, no, we just need to do political programs. So it was not a East Coast, West Coast split, as a lot of people are led to believe. It was an ideological split, because not only did the New York chapter get so-called kicked out, but the Los Angeles chapter got kicked out, and a couple others in on that area. So it was ideological split, What I missed was all the community programs. I wasn't able to participate in the breakfast programs or the free medical clinics, or deal with the sickle cell and the lead poisoning testing in the buildings and the pesticides, get rid of the rats, and all the community programs that we had that were targeted by J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI's counterintelligence program, and league with the police departments. They destroyed the programs. And I missed when the programs were really being, functioning and loved by the community. Because that's still, a Panther serves the community body and soul. And we always said we carry Malcolm in our heart and Lloyd Book in our back pocket. But it wasn't fun at all. Because you were not only looking out for the police, but you were looking out for those comrades that had once been together that were looking to get you. I only had one incident. I was selling a Panther paper on 125th Street, and 3 of them rolled up on me, and they said, you can't sell that paper here. By then, I knew what was up with the split. And I told them, I said, look, I'm just trying to just carry on what you started and shit. I was armed. They were armed. It could have been something. But an older Panther there, Nat Shanks, I'm going to call his name out. He said, leave the brother alone. He doesn't know, and blah, blah, blah. And so they moved on. And the brother I was going to almost go after was Brother Bullwhip. We joke with each other about that now, about who was ready to shoot each other down first and everything. But that was a bad time, and getting to what we do now, because I we only got 5 minutes left.
No problem. We'll have another session, so don't rush anything.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, don't rush anything.
All right. So again, the newspaper was the big thing. I'll focus on that, and then we'll get to the other stuff next time. The newspaper, I began to be distribution manager when folks started leaving. My coordinator, that ran the New York chapter at that point, underneath the UEP Newton faction. She went to California supposedly for a week, and she didn't come back for a month, and then she left. And then we lost the bookstore, like I mentioned, and then it got passed on to me. So I began to pick up the papers from Kennedy Airport when they were shipped from Oakland and bring them back to the Bronx, and then from there distribute them to those chapters on the East Coast that was still under UE. Primarily was Boston, Baltimore, Philly, and anybody that had subscriptions like bookstores and so forth, we would, I'd mail it over to them. And that's when I really began to see firsthand what COINTELPRO was doing, because they hated the newspaper. Because it gave out information throughout the country. We were actually the largest selling newspaper in the country in terms of Black papers were concerned. And I would go to the airport, drive out there, and it was in the warehouse. The freight, flights would bring them, and they couldn't find the papers. Now, keep in mind, the papers came out every single week back then for 25 cents each. So every week you had to go pick them up, and you had to sell them and then turn in the money. We got a certain cut out of it for selling them. Same thing with the stores that would sell them. And if the papers weren't there, then you were behind. Sometimes they would leave them out in the rain, and they would get wet and destroyed. Other times, they would just go and urinate on them. They would piss all over the papers so that we couldn't use them. There was a time when they actually put them in a truck and shipped them to my house, to my address. And they said, oh, here's the bill. Like, I didn't ask you to ship them here. I don't have that money. Then they take them back to the airport. So anything they could do to stall us, getting the paper out and getting it distributed, they did it. My solution eventually was I had student government pay the bill, and they shipped them to Hunter College. And from there, we did the distribution out of Hunter. Because we had people in BSU in every area. We infiltrated the president's office, the chancellor's office, everybody's office was infiltrated by us. by our students, doing work study or whatever. So we knew everything going on, and we was able to deal with the registrar and deal with the money and everything else there for our benefit.
Yeah, I think I read and Look For Me in the Whirlwind that the FBI even intercepted the paper, in transit.
Yeah,
And maybe even doctored some of it, changed things up.
absolutely.
They went hardcore with it.
The doctoring was a little difficult for the paper because it was weekly, but they did, create their own documents and put our name on it. They did a lot of dastardly things. I'll get into that the next session. In terms of that, when we deal with political prisoners and POWs and what we're doing now. So it's